It is a great pleasure to be joined today by our audience in Cambridge, but also to know the hundreds that are online, and there really are, tuning in to live stream from all around the world. Welcome to everybody. It's entirely appropriate that Dr. Orietta de Roald, Associate Professor in the Faculty of English and Fellow in St John's College here in Cambridge, has been elected to deliver this year's Sandars Lectures in Bibliography. As Orietta told us in her first lecture, it was a manuscript in the University Library here in Cambridge, which was the focus of her PhD and which started her asking questions, which we've been on a journey with her this week, about medieval paper, and which set her off on this painstaking and exquisite research track, which brought her to write her most recent book, Paper in Medieval England, From Pulp to Fictions, published by Cambridge University Press in 2020. And the subject of this year's lectures, Paper Past and Paper Future. It's also appropriate because ever since that first contact with the University Library, Orietta has built successful collaborations and professional relationships and friendships with many of the University Library staff, not only with curatorial staff, but also colleagues in the Conservation and Collection Care Unit, in the Digital Library Unit, and in our Digital Content Unit. These genuine research partnerships have brought immense benefit and pleasure to those professionals and to the library as a whole. And these lectures have so far demonstrated some of the results of that research and how Orietta's deep engagement with our collections have shed fascinating light on the importance of the study of paper as a material substance, as a commodity, and as a technological innovation. More of that tonight. I'm delighted that we had the opportunity now to learn what's next in Orietta's final Sandars Lecture, Paper Futures. There will be time at the end of today's lecture to put in some questions to Orietta if she's willing to do that. And for those joining online, there is a comment section on your screen where you can submit your questions. So with that, Orietta, may I invite you to give your final Sandars Lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess, for this very kind introduction. So in the past 2 lectures, I have looked at the story of paper through time. I've also examined the way in which paper cannot offer firm answers on questions of localization. Of course, this is not because paper cannot be traced to certain localities or be included in certain spaces. We can do that, but we don't yet have enough data to offer firmer suggestions. We should not forget, as I said yesterday, that paper travel, and so does paper. And there will be some more traveling today too. In this lecture, I complete the life cycle of this lectures series by thinking a little bit more about paper as a technology and about the exciting contributions that new technologies, in particular digital photography, bring to bear on the study of paper. This approach seeks to further examine the potential future of paper studies. Kerr aptly suggested that paper in the future should be examined using exact techniques. What did Kerr have in mind when he used the term exact techniques? Presumably, he imagined techniques associated with photography rather than tracing. But was he also imagining any type of exact comparative techniques? In this lecture, I wish then to consider briefly the question of how paper has been studied to date, how the focus on the study of watermarks has evolved through time, and tell the story of how technologies were used to talk about each other. I will then discuss some experiments which I have been carrying out in collaboration with Maciej Powilovski, head of the Digital Content Unit at Cambridge University Library. You will have seen that during these lectures a variation in the quality of images. There was a variation in the quality of images that I show, just to put it mildly. The better quality images were made by the professional, and this professional was Maciej. So how did scholars of the past characterize the study of paper, and why did they get so excited about it? It is perhaps the name and the achievement of Charles Briquet which we often have in mind when we think about the study of medieval paper. I have often referred to his work, though, throughout these lectures. His relentless travel through European libraries and archives to document and collect thousands of watermarks is truly remarkable. He achieved the unimaginable by publishing his collection of Les Filigranes in 1904. But Briquet's method built on years of interest on the study of paper marks, that's how they were referred to in the 19th century, starting already in the 19th century. He was not the first filigranology to undertake the study of paper marks, and certainly the interest and curiosity that paper elicited in relation to its marks started well before the publication of the Briquet album that you can see on these slides. In 1982, Edo Lobre, in his Paper Mold and Mold Makers, listed 60 scholars interested in watermarks from the 18th and 19th century across Europe. Among the British specialists, he listed the antiquarian Lewis, Fenn, Dean, Sotheby, Hunter, and Lemon. In 1952, Labarre, in his study of watermarks in Great Britain, offers an overview of what these men contributed to the study of paper in Britain. However, there were some omissions, and these omissions came from this list, of which, and on this omission now, I wish to touch upon. In my first lecture, I have mentioned the clear impression deriving from Wanley's letters that he was extremely interested in paper. In fact, not only did he collect specimens of handwriting, he also collected specimens of various material, including paper. On the 25th of June 1699, Wanley wrote to Samuel Pepys regarding some specimens of parchment which Pepys had sent to him. In this letter, Wanley discusses not only a possible chronology for the said pieces of parchment, but he also offers his thoughts on the significance of writing a history of paper. And he writes, "As to the pieces of parchment, I suppose, sir, you had them of Mr. Bagford, from whom likewise I have received some hundreds of such pieces and leaves, written at different times and in different places. This collection of shreds and scraps of old parchment make me bold to mention to you, sir, another like collection of paper that I have made, chiefly by the help of the same Mr. Bagford, when I was last at London. These I have put together in 2 volumes, of which I will venture to give you some account." He then gives a detailed description of one of the volumes on the papers that he has collected, and he says that he collected them from around the world, and at the end he adds, "The other volume," so he has 2 volumes, this is the second volume, "is a collection of sheets and pieces of white European paper which are placed according to their several marks and stamps. The reason why I gather them together, though every sort is still incomplete, was not only to satisfy my curiosity in knowing what sort of paper is in use among so many nations, or to please myself or friends by looking on the fine colors and marbles, etc., but to know whether they would confirm a notion I have of the original of our paper, which to me they do." And further, I thought that some time or other, the history of paper might be attempted, and with so much, the more hopes of success when the author, whoever he may be, has before his eyes most of the sorts of that subject that he is to treat about. So, if you have a mind to see either of these books of paper or the pieces of parchment or all of them, I will soon send them to you with some original drawings that I have. I was surprised to learn that Wanley not only grasped the idea of using paper to date material, but also had the vision to think that a history of paper could only be prepared if someone collected sufficient samples of paper for posterity. So this is not just a work for him, this is also something he wants to give to posterity. These 2 volumes are now bound in one, and they are Sloane Manuscript 526 in the British Library. Wanley put together a great collection of paper from all over the world, and here I put an example from Japan, but there is apparently from Turkey, from everywhere. He also had tracing paper, color paper, wallpaper, wrapping paper, and also something to me that was quite unusual. He has paper cards. He has labels of the reams of paper. There is a wealth of contemporary 17th and 18th century paper in this book, which, as far as I'm aware, has been very little studied. And if somebody in the audience is working on it, I really would love to hear about it. But it was this set of watermarks reproduction which attracted my attention when I first saw the manuscript. Towards the end of the volume, we have Wanley's collection of watermarks, and there are several sheets of this impression of woodcuts of watermark. There is no information about their provenance, and therefore I was wondering, where is he taking this material from? In his letters, as we have seen, Wanley often mentioned his friend John Beckford. Beckford was a shoemaker, a professional collector of, and a dealer in books. We saw in the first lecture that Wanley wrote to Sloane of Beckford's intention to produce a history of printing. Wanley then proceeded to describe the content of such history and suggested that it should also include mark of paper. When I examined these marks, this one, I suspected that these reproductions may well be associated with Beckford's efforts, and subsequently Ed Potten, former head of rare books at the UL, who is currently working on Beckford's woodcuts, kindly confirmed to me that these sheets are identical to some impression he found in Beckford's papers. Sorry. These that you can see here in these slides are, to my mind, the first attempts, if not the first, to print reproductions of Watermarks' impression in Britain. The focus is on representation of the mark. It does not provide any additional information about sizes, chain lengths, or lay lengths, but the project in itself is remarkable. It is also remarkable that the technology of print was put to use to represent the paper marks themselves. I suppose woodcuts had for centuries been used. Tonight the voice is leaving me. I suppose woodcuts had for centuries been used to illustrate books. They could be used then to illustrate paper. This is meta-materiality at its best. I have no doubt that when John Fenn integrated his study of watermarks into the edition of the Paston's Letters in 1787, he had this early work in mind. However, Fenn took the reproduction of watermarks a step further. He printed his tracing actual size without the measurements and gave dates. And however, some of the watermarks are printed, mirrored, like this grape. Not quite sure what happened there, but it seems just reversed. However, by then, so by the end of the 19th century, it was evident that people like Fenn were fully aware of the potential of dating material from watermarks. And this detail table will tell us not only the letters of the not only of the letters of the past on here, but you have the date and you have the marks. And this is across the full volumes of Fenn. But it was another filigranologist who took the study of watermarks even further. And this person is William Young Otley, an art collector characterized by Nicholas Turner as a writer, connoisseur, and merchant amateur. Writing of Otley's achievement about paper marks in the third volume of his Principia Typographica, Samuel Sotheby noted, Mr. Otley amassed an interesting and large collection of the specimens of the paper made in the Netherlands from as early a period as 1350 to 1550, which together with the tracings he obtained of mark in dated volume of accounts, wherein there was no blank leaves, and also tracing from the public account books preserved at Haarlem and elsewhere, he was enabled to form a series of drawings of the various watermarks he has met with and arranging them according to dates. So Sotheby then explained that he received from Warne and Otley, William, brother, the entire collection of the different specimens of paper which were kept by his brother. Sotheby does not provide any other information about Otley's collection of watermarks, and it has not been mentioned in scholarship ever since. I happened to stumble across this very book when I started working on my paper project several years ago. It has been under our very nose as Manuscript Additional 2878 in the University Library. This album has gone largely unnoticed, but in collaboration with Ed Potten, I intend to make the contents of this book available more widely. For now, I just wish to note a brief description and some thoughts on Otley's method in recording watermarks. Otley arranged his watermarks tracing in 4 volumes. They are labeled A, B, D, and E. Volume A and B are hardbound in parchment, but volume D and E are self-bound in paper folder, soft-bound in paper folders. There is no trace of a possible volume C. So these are all the volumes that we have in the library. In this image, you can see the first page of volume 1. The collection is entitled Marks of Unknown Signification. You can also see the thin translucent paper with the tracings of the mark, which is pasted on the blank pages of the book to form an album. Otley traced the watermarks and their position in relation to chain lines, provided the year and the reference to where he found the marks. Note the accurate details by which Otley gives information about the type of watermark, large paper or thick paper, and how he describes the source from which he obtained the watermark. He also adds such observations such as the state of the occurrence of the mark constant, same mold, crossing-referencing to other instances that he had already encountered. The way in which Otley studied, traced, catalogued, and indexed the watermark that we found in his notebooks is extremely remarkable. He seems to have grasped the concept of twin marks or paper stocks, a concept which is not present in briquet. And of course, Otley does not tell us this is a twin mark, but there is the sort of idea that he's getting this idea that there are two molds doing similar things. He used a nomenclature in English of the marks he traced and fully understood the potential of using paper for chronological investigations. However, briquet in 1904, even though he did not fully understand the idea of twin, he brought forward again this idea of the study of paper. He certainly comprehended that paper was a technology deriving from the know-how of craftsmen and craftswomen, and as such developed through times. Even though Briquet's album focuses on the iconography of the watermarks in his introduction to the album, he discussed a number of important points about the need to investigate paper beyond its watermarks. This section of the book, so the introduction, usually is not really reflected on from scholarship. And I'll tell you why. He provided the size of the sheet in his work. He gave the chain line, the laid line, so you can see here how he described the watermarks. But what you can see on the slides is the beginning of his work, when he actually talks to us about the chain line and the laid line. He noted how the combination of these features changed through time. For example, 14th century paper will have laid line farther apart than 15th century paper. And he published this photograph to explain this development. He observed how Italian mold makers would make a mold without a wooden rib and attach a chain line onto the laid line. And here you can see, so this is the drawing of a mold, the famous dragon that you all saw at the beginning of the lectures. And here you see the dragon, but you can actually tell that the wooden rib, which supports the chain line, is not here. And in fact, if we have a little look from a side, you can actually really see. So these are the wooden rib. Notice, please, the cuneiform form, because there will be a test later. No, it won't. And this is the chain line. So you can see that there is no support here. So he was the first filigranologist to notice that. This technique is used particularly in Italian medieval paper, and it has been localized to the Marche regions, possibly Fabriano, although we seem to have it also in Pioraco. This practice, however, is not found everywhere. Here, this is the mold of the French paper, Additional 6190, the one with the lovely coat of arms. The measurement and the number of chain line is exactly the same, but what you can notice here is that throughout there is the rib supported by the wire. And in fact, if we look underneath this mold, you can actually see all the ribs there that support the wire. In these slides, you actually see how we reconstructed those molds. We look at the paper. And you can actually also see that there is a little shadow here. Can you see the shadow across all the chain lines? And this is the watermark. If we go on this line, you have the shadow, but on the chain line, there is no shadow. And the reason is because there is the missing wooden rib. And the reason of the shadow is that cuneiform that supports. So when they make the paper, the shadow will show. And this sort of information is everything that can be derived by close observation of paper. In essence, through the close analysis of the morphology of paper, Briquet had started to think about how the technology of paper making influenced the making of paper itself. As a technology, paper is the result of the ingenuity of the paper makers who saw in its development an economic gain. It has been already noted by several scholars that the technique of making paper went through important changes towards the end of the 13th century. For example, the invention of the mold that I show you, made with wires. They also introduced hammers equipped with nails on the head so that the rags could be mashed more efficiently. And then they use water power to drive these hammers. The switching from the starch to animal sizing also contributed to make the paper more uniform. And finally, of course, we have the inclusion of the watermark, at least in Western paper. So the product paper was improved at several levels. And to offer an analogy of how products improve is exactly the same thing as our mobile phone. Does anybody remember the brick? Or the sleek multimedia platform? I think we are all going to go for this one, actually. It's so much more easy to deal with. So like the mobile phone, paper changed and sometimes improved through time as a consequence of changes in the hardware used to make paper. Mold makers improved their technique. The pulp which made the paper also became finer, which turned out to then create nicer paper. It took a little while to get the paper making technique to high standards. And by this, I mean to go from this paper, when you can see a very nice blotch of rag there, and this is a paper of the end of the 13th century. Then you go to paper at the beginning of the 14th century, and you can still see that it's not quite there. And then you get to the end of the 15th century, the beautiful paper of the Winchester manuscript, which actually here looks yellow, but I can reassure you is white. It's really white. So from these images, it is clear that one of the significant contributors to this improvement is the mold. I say one because, of course, the pulp is the other big contributors to good paper. Not much more work has been done on the study of the mold, clearly an essential tool in paper-making history. In 1982, Lauber published the first monograph-length study dedicated to the analysis of the significance of this tool. In 2005, the Fondazione Gianfranco Fedrigoni, in collaboration with Istocata, published a very important book, La forma, formisti e cartai nella storia della carta occidentale, that was edited by Giancarlo Castagnari, with several important essays on this subject. But usually the significance of the study of the mold, which I had already highlighted in an essay in 2005, is perhaps less studied by paper historians and cultural historians. And yet I feel this could be a very productive area of research going forward. And I would like to bring one example. It is a puzzle to me how medieval mold maker stitched the chain line onto the mesh formed by the lead line to then attach them onto the wood ribs. And you can see here what I mean. So this is just the stitching that goes up, across, and down, up, across, and down. So this is what I think one type of stitch. So my mom is a seamstress. She tried during my youth to teach me how to sew and how to embroider. She relentlessly tried to make me memorize different types of stitching: running stitch, back stitch, split stitch, stem stitch, etc. I was not very naturally inclined towards embroidery. I'd rather read books or actually climbing trees. That was really fun. So I must admit that the only stitching I could do with some success was cross-stitching. She will probably now be happy to know that all those hours of training were not completely wasted on me. When I started looking at the imprint that the mold left on the sheet of paper, I could not but notice that the imprint of the stitching of the chain line was just not the same across the types of paper stocks and across time. I mean, this is becoming nerdy a little bit, but it's really, really interesting when you actually look at it. Briquet did signal some of this different stitching, but he didn't really do quite a lot of work. But let's look, for example, just a couple of examples. So, if you can see there, you can see this is a stitch that goes across, and is what I call long stitch. So it goes up and down, and then it carries on the next one. Here you don't have that sort of stitching, so you just wonder how is the stitching done here? Is it going across the wire rather than going aside the wire? Is it just going up and down? And then we have this stitching, which is really quite interesting, 5 millimeters apart. I even measure it. My mom would be proud of whoever did that. 5 millimeters apart, exact number of laid line, because as you know, when you stitch, you need to count the threads. You count the threads and then you move on. And this is, again, different. This is different from this and from that. So can we trace and quantify these features to learn more about mold makers in the medieval period? The answer to this question may lead to interesting results in relation to production practices, but also I think timeline. You know, we're talking about chronology and putting paper on a timeline. Can this sort of work help us? And then, of course, location. If anyone in the audience, again, is working on stitching or mold, please do let me know. We might collaborate on something. I certainly would feel less alone. So this introduction to the study of paper-making techniques leads us now to the answer to Kerr's question on exact techniques. Scholars have used the technologies available to them to record watermarks. And that was availability according to the time in which they were living in. So Wanley used Bagford's woodcut, Otley used tracing, and Briquet used tracing too. But we also have other methodologies. So we all know about beta radiography, and we also know about rubbings. I don't think librarians like rubbings very much. So the beta radiography is actually a much better system, but it requires, in order to be effective, only the analysis of very small area. So we cannot do beta radiography on big sheet of paper. So as you are all aware by now, my argument is that we need to capture the image of the full mold for analysis. And this is what it looks like. In 2016, I started having conversation with Maciej about how best we could use digital photography to study the research questions that I had in relation to paper. And what I really wanted was this. So I wanted the full, complete sheet of paper with all the information in it. We tried various techniques, but they did not work. But now imaging has moved forward quite rapidly, and at the 35th Biennial Congress of the International Association of Paper Historians in Washington in June 2021, scholars have presented a number of projects which shows the potential of digital and multispectral photography. And especially they apply that to paper. So there was this really interesting presentation by Margaret Holben, Professor William Seethers, Professor Richard Johnson, that show the potential of digital imaging for the study of the twin watermarks in Leonardo's papers. But other presentations in general investigate other techniques to think about paper and presented on amazing projects such as the Bernstein project. So things are moving, and Cambridge is there. In 2020, Cherish, the Cambridge Heritage Science Hub, was awarded £2,800,000 from the HRC Capacity for Collection Fund, called CAPCO. Building on existing departmental collaborations, the funding has created a distributed research infrastructure across the university collections. The project was led by Dr. Paola Ricciardi, the senior research scientist in the Fitzwilliam Museum. And I put the full team on the slides to really show the formidable collaboration that has gone into this application. This project enabled the acquisition of new equipment, and that include a camera and a computer software by the university library, which has then been installed in a separate studio and within this studio and with this equipment, we will be able to do photography in hyperspectral images. This camera, you can see the camera here, is a monster, I thought, can capture a much wider range of the light bandwidth, and the software can control what camera is recording and what part of light it is recording. This equipment can take pictures using different lights, but I was very surprised, actually almost shocked, to learn that the best light to take images for my purposes, that is to record the imprint of the mold on paper, was in fact the light which a human eye cannot see. So I cannot give you a picture of it. The dark is black, is completely black, and there is no visible light, and therefore no pictures. Amazing. I just couldn't believe that such a thing existed. So what happened then when we take the pictures? So this is the first picture, we, should say, Mate, no we. This is the first picture that is captured, and then when we process it, the ink is almost gone. You can really see all the features there. So if we see images like this, then they can also become data. And as a virtual artifact, digital photography translates in the analog into digital, and thus into that data, which is made of pixels and numbers. These images then will enable the creation of an automatic system to measure and detect size of folio, distances between chain line, height and width of watermark, and which are really the key feature I mentioned in the lecture. And therefore, next step, automation. Automation and comparative techniques of all this material. And I suppose this is my dream, to be able to acquire funding which will enable such photography to take place, not only for the 100 English manuscripts or so that the university library holds, but also for all the manuscripts across the Cambridge collections. And there are about 243 manuscripts produced in England, and I haven't quite done all the counting of all the ones not produced in England. But such quantity will give us a substantial corpus of material to work from. And of course, there is more. In the lectures this week, I have been focusing on the paper manuscripts produced in England, but of course, paper does not discriminate. The Greek Manuscript Project, funded by the Polonsky Foundation, aims to catalogue 443 Greek manuscripts in Cambridge collections. They date up to 1700, so not all are medieval. 270 are on paper, and of those 270s, 114 can be ascribed to a period between 1300 and 1500. And all of them, of course, use medieval paper. In fact, they use some paper that I can also find in my own manuscripts. And here I put an example. This is the scissor, and I could even test you now. Can you see the shadow? Indeed, paper travels. Its ubiquity and significance for communication and diplomacy can also be seen in an examination of the medieval and early modern paper in Cambridge across other collections, including the Cairo Geniza. So we're here going to the Middle East. The Thinking Paper project, which I direct with Dr. Suzanne Paul, was awarded a university's research and collection program grant under the materiality threat. And this enabled us, in collaboration with Ben Outwaite, head of the Geniza Research Unit, and Dr. Nick Posgay, to carry out a scoping exercise on the medieval paper in the Geniza collection. The scoping project shows that there is much potential for investigating the paper in Cambridge. And this is another example. This watermark and this paper stock is also in my own database. Cambridge does have a critical mass of pre-modern paper documents and books. Its comprehensive and systematic study would enable us to build on what it is already known about paper. The structural and technical comparative analysis of this material would lead to future socio-economic and historical investigations. And I would like to conclude the story of paper past and paper future with a further reflection. At the beginning of my career, Dr. Ian Doyle encouraged me to take on the challenge of studying medieval paper by inviting me to Durham in 2003 and telling me this, talking about this project, must be done. Dr. Ian Doyle, a graduate of the English faculty in Cambridge, whose archives, or at least some of them, are now held at the university library, fully understood, if you recall my quotation, that the jigsaw puzzle we are all working on is so big that it may need to the help of every eye to try to fit a piece in it. It is this idea of every eye which then answers and is my answers to Kerr's call for expertise. We can all be experts. We just need to give paper a chance and acknowledging the powerful information that can be derived from paper analysis. Everyone can help to put together the jigsaw puzzle of medieval paper. But like all puzzles, we need to prepare a platform on which different people can work, can place their pieces one at a time, and that place must now be digital. It must interoperate with other platforms, and the Bernstein project does, to a certain extent, quite a lot of this work. But I would like to link the focus on watermark to paper stocks, and here paper in books can help. My vision and ambition, because every project must have research question, but also a vision. And the vision is a virtual world in which all of us can add that little jigsaw piece of what they know about paper, and at the same time learning from the knowledge of other people. Of course, there is a need for funding to realize this idea, possibly a combination of technologies already available and new technology which will need to be invented. Invention, after all, is at the core of the development of medieval paper, and it is fitting that such invention is applied to the study of the past to learn more about it for the knowledge of the future. This is the only way to then stand back and admire the jigsaw puzzle. To have that spatial vision will give a better picture of the medieval period. But then what can we see from this jigsaw puzzle? Like a beautiful mosaic, we can see technological innovation, communication, transnational interactions, movement of people, multilingual writing, East and West relationships, diaspora of skills and material, economic growth, the expansion of writing and learning, and people interactions. The medieval period is not just about the Black Death, the War of the Roses, and the various other numerous conflicts. It is also about technological invention, and this invention is what paper captures. That is a very human, humane, and tangible story which we can tell because we have the books. Through those books and documents of hundreds of years ago, not only can we understand more about our past, but we can also reinvent our future. There is a close technological synergy which can be explored with much potential to understand people, because in the end, the story of people is all about human relations. Thank you for listening tonight and for the past evenings, and thank you for the audience here and also the audience online. And also want to thank the people who have been helping me to put together the Sandars Lectures. No scholar is really an island. Thank you.
Orietta, that was absolutely wonderful. I'm almost tempted that you should have had the music on after all. Absolutely joyful. You have so artfully taken us from the most tiny fragment in image in those watermarks all the way through to the opening up of the globe and then the universe. It's been beautifully done and an absolute pleasure to be a part of it. We will come to questions very shortly, but I would just like to say a huge thank you. We'll say it again, but thank you. And also for the way in which you've approached this throughout, which is just an absolute testament to collaboration and skill, and that is hugely appreciated. It does take, the world to help us, so thank you so much. We have been so lucky to have Orietta for 3 evenings giving this incredible insight into her work, her collaboration, and to the making and the travels and the journeys of medieval paper. I'd love to open up at this point for questions, which will start in the room and then we will move online. So
Sure.
Looking for any hands that would like to come up at this point, and we've got some microphones to take with us as well. Got one over here.
Orietta, thank you very much for a really thrilling series of lectures. Can I ask a really boring question? Possibly a stupid question, but you've shown that technology exists now to capture the kind of imprint of the paper mould on paper stocks with ever greater ease and precision. Which makes me wonder how people like Otley managed the task of tracing watermarks at all without the benefit of multispectral imaging or beta radiography or even a cold light source and a light sheet. How did they do it?
They needed a light, and I think they put it over some form or light source. I mean, I don't know, but it's just not possible that they were able to do the tracing or the tracing that they did without something underneath. And I'm wondering whether it was a mirror and a candle or something that I don't want to go into, because hot light is not something that people like in libraries. So, but I think that they must have done it in this way, or because you can't just do it against the window. You know, they have. But also they were allowed to do that. Sorry, I say it because...
Not today.
Not happening today, no.
Maybe we should just draw a veil over that.
Yes.
You're wondering what happened to that volume C.
Yes.
That got too close to the flame. Thank you. That's not a sugar. It's a great question. It's another angle, isn't it, in terms of the whole studies, and here as well.
Orietta, thank you very much for a very interesting series of lectures. It's been fascinating. You've talked a lot about cooperation around Europe and in the West. Is there cooperation between paper experts, if you like, between the West and the East? And also, does the production of Eastern paper also carry watermarks?
So I'll start with the second question. So Eastern paper usually don't have watermarks to begin with. There was really a distinction between the, at least in the medieval period. It will probably happen in the later period, but you know, I don't want to say things on which I don't know very much about. But during the medieval period, Eastern paper had no watermark. And European paper had watermarks. And there's been all sorts of theory about it, including the fact that they wanted to distinguish between Christian and Islamic paper and all sorts. I don't think we can speculate on any of that. The point is, one has got watermark and the other doesn't. Arabic paper hasn't got watermarks. They have different way of marking the mold, but they don't do watermarks. Regarding the collaboration East and West, Suzanne and I are involved on an European project, which is headed up by José Maria Fernandez, and it looks at the idea of the travel of paper, not just in Europe but across. And he, Professor Fernandez, has been brilliant in really connecting with the community of scholars working on paper in, for example, Istanbul. And so this is quite an exciting collaboration, actually. So there are this sort of conversation. But I also think we need to have this conversation here more, so that we can also export what we can learn from that into wider collaborations.
Thank you. Suzanne.
Yeah, question from the online audience. Brian Draper was fascinated by the Sloan manuscript 526, and has it been digitized? Is that
No.
So it's not been digitized.
No.
It's not available. Maybe after this, the British Library will.
Well, it's so it was 2 volumes put together, and when I got it, I thought I needed some more muscles to take it to the table. It's an amazing book. There is even textiles in there. Mm-hmm. Silk, because of course you can write on silk. So I'm wondering, does he think that silk is paper? I don't know. It is amazing.
Is there another online one?
Yeah, another question from David Shaw, who says the invention of printing caused a considerable increase in the consumption of paper. Mm. Does this development have an impact on your studies of the chronology and localization of paper stocks?
Yes, but I have to say that I come clean. I stay away from printing. So Paul Needham is doing quite a wonderful job looking at the printing, the paper stock. You know, he ran through all the Caxton paper stock, for example. So there are experts that really understand about printing. And what I do, I use more comparative techniques. So I see what I do, and then I do my bit, and then we come in together and we see where we can go from there.
So there's potential around collaboration
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Bringing together data sets.
Absolutely.
From manuscript
Studying
and print.
paper is not a one-woman job.
Are there further questions from the floor, from the auditorium?
Thank you so much, Orietta. Could I just extend that question about the wider geographical study of paper? Would I be right in thinking that the Middle Eastern paper is also rag pulp paper, so that essentially the materials are the same as?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Eastern and Western
So,
rags.
would you see it in thinking about paper? Is that what you're thinking of? And would you conceive of the paper from the east of Eurasia, made from very different materials, as a different kind of medium that obviously deserves its own study, and as maybe as distinct as parchment is from the rag pulp paper? Or so, how is the term paper itself a useful one from in that perspective?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. I think paper is paper. And there was a moment where they called paper papyrus. So that's where I go a bit, you know, paper is paper, papyrus is papyrus. They might have etymological connection there, but these are two things. So I think as a broad umbrella, paper works. Then, of course, you know, as you said, the point is to go into different tradition and then talk about how paper was made, or talk about how paper was used. Or we can call it a writing surface if we want, so that then we go even a notch high, because then writing surfaces can actually be absolutely anything you can write on. But I don't know, I'm always a little bit worried when we go in from taxonomy, and then we then, you know, go for too much specialization, because medieval, well, the accounts that I looked at, and that doesn't involve the accounts in the East, so I have to say, you know, the accounts, they just call it paper, they just call it carta. So it's, I don't know, I would just go for that and then see what we can do when we actually describe the material, rather than inventing different terms.
Thank you.
I think we've got time for one more question, and I'm wondering if people would allow me kind of a chair's privilege for that, because I have been so absolutely enchanted and impressed by the incredible intricacy of the research you've undertaken. And you've given us in this final lecture just these lovely kind of points in time as well, from that sea mistress, your mother, through to the new technology which Matt Check and the Digital Content Studio are taking us. And you began these lectures by taking us back to sort of the first manuscripts which you were using for your PhD and how they took you forward. Can you tell us just what drew you to this substance? What has been the passion that you've shown has been uplifting? So what was it that kind of captured your imagination and has kept it in that place?
Well, I mean, I will have to be honest and not diplomatic. It was just the fact that scholars just could not talk about medieval paper without being judgmental about it. And when I was doing my PhD students, we all are, we all been there, where we go like, no, this is wrong. And you don't know why it's wrong. I mean, that is the point. You know that there's something there. So about this manuscript DD, it was written by an amateur because paper was only used by amateur, by non-professional. That was the narrative presented then. So we're talking about 2000, when I was doing my PhD. And I was just thinking, well, this is not quite right. And I just took it on and said, well, I'll demonstrate it. And then I was thinking it would be a postdoc. That was my idea. 2 years of postdoc, we move on, and 20 years later, I'm still here. So that was really what it was, the drive to kind of demonstrate, to move forward the thinking and the knowledge, so that as we move forward, then we can then use new narrative to then create more knowledge, instead of keeping on going back to the same knowledge. And then there was also this idea that paper was cheap. So if you use paper, it's because you have no money. And I was thinking, it's not. That paper, the DD manuscript, is written on royal paper. It's the top-notch paper. So, so I suppose it's an academic argument that the passion really drove me here, and now I'm in it.
Well, I think that's wonderful. And if there was a wrong you were setting out to right, I would say that you have done that profoundly and with us over 3 evenings with the Sandars Lectures. So can I ask everyone to join me again in saying thank you to Orietta, which has just been an extraordinary journey over 3 evenings. And I will also like to say thank you to the cast, which she has shown us, who have supported Orietta through this, to our audiences online and our audiences here in Cambridge. We have really enjoyed your company, and thank you for joining us. And finally also to Samuel Sandars, our 19th century benefactor, who founded these lectures and given us such pleasure over so many years. So to Orietta, first and foremost, thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.